Hello, my name is Trisha Wong. I'm a CAT undergrad student, and because I'm a transfer student, I don't actually know what year I'm in. So, the project I'll be showcasing here is the first project from IAT 202, which I took during the fall of 2020 semester online, as pretty much everyone else did for their classes, I imagine. It might seem like I'm kind of stating the obvious by doing that, but trust me, the pandemic struggle is pretty relevant to why I'm even talking about this project in the first place. So, first, I guess I'll be showing the film itself. Here goes nothing. So now that you've seen it, I guess I'm going to wax poetic to you now about why my project was kinda, probably pretty good, I guess, maybe, I don't know. They told me to keep it simple. So, like I mentioned, the pandemic struggle. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but I actually think the reason my project is actually worth anything is primarily because it just demonstrates how much you can do, even if you live alone in an apartment in the middle of a pandemic lockdown with absolutely no fancy equipment. Nothing at all. The dilemma for me, really, was that I spent the days leading up to the deadline for the pre-production materials agonizing over what was pretty much this. How the heck do you shoot and also feature in your own film at the same time? Bonus round, how do you make it interesting when the only setting you have access to is the one-bedroom apartment that you're confined to in lockdown? Obviously, me not shooting is off the table, or else no film would get made, but me not featuring in the film meant that I would have no characters, and a story you only have 1 minute to tell, like in Project 1, is going to be either terrible or very boring, and what's the difference, really? So if you have literally no characters in it, I mean, what can you do? It was really quite the big creative challenge for me, and I really struggled with that a lot. So, after a little bit of thinking, the best solution that I could come up with was just to make the main character animated instead, because I dabble in animation occasionally for fun, and I figured, hey, that's totally something I can do. And if I scaled that character down and made it tiny, then bam, suddenly my small apartment feels a whole lot bigger, and it's like a totally different world, and it's actually interesting. That said, the only way that I could think of justifying in-universe why there's such a discrepancy in dimensions is that it's part of something otherworldly and ethereal. And if I'm the only other acting figure that can be used in this, well, it's gonna have to be tied to me somehow. So, what better representation would there be than of my imagination? And that ended up developing into this kind of general representation of my imagined self-conscious. And the theme of the film kind of took hold as what it's probably like for me to graduate, from university, because I was so afraid of leaving the comfortable routine of school and entering this real working world only for it to be miserable and suck. And I say was, but still am. But yeah, it ended up taking a more generalized meaning after I got some peer feedback, and the obstacles that the bunny blob self-conscious thing encounters are better suited to symbolize life in general than just school specifically. And so that's how it ended up as my hopes and dreams, and the obstacle became adulthood in general instead. Also, if it wasn't clear, even though I had always planned for the bunny blob to be crushed just like the cruel, unforgiving reality does to all of us once we leave our comfort zone, I also didn't want to seem like a 13-year-old edgy kid, which is why the whole thing does kind of have an overall hopeful, cheerful tone, especially at the end. I wanted it to be cute, still, even if it dies at the end. But yeah, I mean, the moral of the story is really always to pick yourself back up, or something nice sounding like that. So that's one story. I guess there's also the not so deep and meaningful inspirational story of how I managed to cobble this whole thing together with pretty much nothing at my disposal, except my trusty computer and my iPhone SE from 5 years ago. Most of the shooting was pretty boring, uneventful, just mounting my phone on a cheap wiggly tripod for regular pads and tilts. But the only one really worth mentioning is that opening establishing tracking shot that tilts down from the sky and it kind of phases through the balcony door. Because, as I mentioned, if you remember, it's just me here. So, a pan and a truck while I'm in the shot. You might be wondering, how the heck did that happen? Great question, would love to answer that. So, I mean, maybe it was just like tricky editing, and I mean, you're not wrong, I did that. But I need that parallax. You can't just make that by doing a moving zoom across the shot in post. So here's what I did for that. The first part of the track is easy enough. It's just a handheld shot that moves into the door, and it's close enough to the door that it actually blacks out the camera. Then you just do a little bit of masking out in post, no biggie. But the track, on the other hand, well, okay. In short, I pretty much put together this horrible contraption that I really wish I took photos of, but I couldn't take photos of it because my photo-taking device was, duct taped to the handle of my vacuum cleaner, which I had wrapped in a string, and that was tied to my finger, and all of that was jury-rigged into this abomination of a pulley system that was wrapped around several table legs, all for one shaky tracking shot. Was it worth it? Absolutely not. Do I regret it? Also absolutely not. And really that's just kind of a pretty good summation of my feelings on this whole project in general. Glad it happened. So that about wraps things up. I guess if you take nothing else away from this, I guess it should be that awful constraints and limitations like this pandemic can sometimes force you to compromise and come up with some interesting ideas. And if you have enough willpower and spite, like me, you could totally pull it off with little to nothing in your hand. So any newbies that are scared of taking IAT 202 in a pandemic, I mean, 100% understandable. I also kind of wish I didn't, but also, you know what? It wasn't that bad. And, you know, I think it might be a challenge that's worth trying if you're into that. If you're a weird masochist like me. So, thanks for your time. And I hope you enjoyed this pretty silly talk.